So I have something that's similar to follow up, and it's been something that we've talked about a number of times. It's sort of tangential to last show. Something I've been feeling for longer than maybe even this show's been going on. Not something I've been able to articulate, but certain media I've consumed and conversations I've had, in addition to the conversations we've had on this podcast, has led me to this place where I thought it would be, I don't know, prudent or interesting to say. And because a friend of mine articulated it really well. And it was about, he and I both took a pretty similar journey where around the same times he was disengaging from his religion, and I was disengaging from my religion and interested in new atheism. And I've gotten to a place where I don't really like the atheist label, and I don't like the direction new atheism has gone, because they're also not being that decent. Like people like, some folks like Dawkins and Hitchens, and I can't remember another one, they're pretty popular in that circle, haven't been what I would call a decent person to various minorities and marginalized groups. And so it got me thinking about how being a decent person to all people is more important than my personal beliefs. And so I've been incredibly critical about Western Christianity, very specifically Southern Baptist Christians. And a lot of it has to do with my own lived experiences. And so I have like this bias towards that because that's what I had to disengage from. And really what matters is it doesn't, that whatever label you identify and use to let people know who you are, if you're being a decent person and treating other people around you decently, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. And I've noticed that I've been more tolerant of other religions than Christianity, and that's not really who I want to be. And the person I want to be is someone who looks at, are you being a decent human? Cool. I don't care what religion you believe in. You believe in that religion for a reason, and that's good for you. I see you being a decent human being. You're a good person.
There's a lot to digest from that. So I like the train of thought. There are a few things that pop into mind immediately as kind of just the reactionary type of thoughts. Nothing negative, just reactionary thoughts. But I want to start with not quite a response, I suppose, as opposed to clarifying maybe a viewpoint as well, because I think they're technically two distinct things you're talking about, and it's not coming across quite that way. Mm-hmm. The being a decent person, being a good person, that part's pretty clear, but there's the underlying focus on a specific label or belief that I feel like is its own conversation as well.
Yes.
And it's not that those are intrinsically separate things. They're very much tied together, because being a decent person will, of course, be dependent upon how you view yourself and values you bring in and exude, etc. But the aspect that is kind of an immediate thought, well, before I get into the serious part of it, Southern Baptists earn the rap they get for many different reasons. I've been around them for a long time, and they are very hypocritical in about 70% of cases. So it's not surprising, right, that that's a sore spot among many people. And that's kind of finger in the wind statistics. There's nothing, you know, based on lived experiences as well. But the thing that's interesting about all of that, I think there's a reason that I might identify with Christian values and all in general as I understand them, and not have the same overall view of it has to be dead set this. It's more a set of guiding principles and teachings to help navigate the world more than it is anything else. And I know we've talked about it at a high level, but that's kind of all the major religions teach the same general guiding principles discussion. There are differences among them. There are different ways of interpretation and, and different ways that people tend to behave within those subsets. But overall, it's pretty clear that you should treat each other with respect and love one another and be of service to those around you. Those kinds of things, right? Like there's not a major religion that teaches persecution, or at least not when taught appropriately. So that part of the conversation could be either hyper-focused on the religious context, which could be warranted, but I think I would want to expand that a little bit further, even if religion is the topic used to explore it, because it's the most salient example, but for it to be more how you behave in exhibiting the morals and beliefs that you possess. So it's still thinking about people who ascribe to a specific set of beliefs, but it expands the scope there beyond just having to be religious merits, because I think that misses the mark a little bit. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. I was sort of processing some of that.
Well, and I didn't say it as clearly as I had hoped. But again, reactionary thoughts, right? Like it's tough to kind of formulate them on the fly. And so I wanted to make sure if I needed to rephrase something, I had the opportunity while it was fresh in mind.
It's one of those things where I need to, as we all do with maybe anything, anything that could turn into a prejudice, and just like let's examine what your values actually are. Do you believe in a God? Okay, cool. That's what you believe in. Do you believe that everybody should believe in the same God the same way that you do? That's probably going to be problematic. Do you believe that people should search for the truth, and if what they find is different from what you find, they may or may not be wrong? Okay, that's something good we can work with. Okay, here's this group over here. You believe their lifestyle's sinful, but you say you love them, but they're not hurting anybody. I don't understand that. And so, I see a problem there. But hey, I'm a Southern Baptist, and I don't care what your lifestyle is. You're not hurting anybody. Everybody is consenting. You're decent to other people. I accept you. Good. I accept that person too.
Well, this is part of why I kind of wanted to emphasize that we could either really hyper-focus on the religious side of it, because it is a very big in its own discussion, or maybe use it as just kind of the mechanism to talk about it, because the perfect point to make within all of that is, for the most part, where religion, any group of religious individuals gets it wrong, is when they either pass judgment or attempt to alter or change someone other than themselves. And there's nothing about any of the religions that teach that, or at least not appropriately. The whole point of any religious belief is the relationship between that person and said deity of choice. And then living a life ascribing or attempting to attain or exude those values and philosophies. And through your behaviors and actions and things, people will be curious about who you are and why you behave the way you behave. And what is it that gives you your calmness or serenity or happiness or prosperity, and learn more through understanding you. You are attempting to shape and control your life and behaviors according to your values, which means, and this is part of why I find this topic hilarious on so many levels, if you're trying to be a decent human being, you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing according to a religious teaching.
Yeah, that made me think of like something I wanted to comment on that you said, and it's like, what if you have a religion that teaches you to be bad to some people? Because I'm sure there are you can take Christianity and people have interpreted it to be, oh, we got to be bad to these people, or we don't accept these people. There's some teachings in Islam where what has been, let me say, I've never read the Quran. I've never read a English translation of the Quran, but what has been shared with me about what's in the Quran and corroborated with some people that believe in Islam, and that is that, like, there are parts of it that tell you be decent to people who believe the way that you believe. And I think at the end of the day, like, your religious texts, your religious beliefs, they're all something that's interpreted. If your religious texts tell you to not be a decent person, why? And it, like, I don't want to do the wrong thing and pass judgment on you, but, like, let's have I've gotten to a place that's like, this is the conversation I want to have with you. I don't want to have a conversation about precepts and apologetics anymore. I don't want to tell you why in however many ways that you're wrong about your beliefs. There's no way your God could exist, etc. That's no longer interesting to me. What is interesting to me is, like, why do you believe that this group of people over here should be treated in a way that is not equal to anyone else?
So it's an important question. Well, it's one of those things where I could certainly pick points to argue for the sake of argument and entertainment, which would be fun. But that's not our goal typically when we are recording anyway. Right. And so part of it is trying to navigate not coming across in such a manner as to make it seem like that's the intent either, and doing it on the fly. Because I tend to have a bit of a sarcastic streak, for those who may not know. And so my brand of humor, I don't, for this conversation, I don't want it to be misconstrued. One of the things that I keep coming back to a lot of times, that I'm pretty sure I've mentioned on the show, maybe not. There's really, I think, two general camps of people who choose to believe in something that is unknown. And that is those who grew up learning that this book was 100% literal as written. There's no attempt to understand anything about it. And the book being, your book of choice. There's no intent to understand anything about it. There's no reason to figure out context or to try to figure out what might be lost in translation or anything else. Like, it's just, nope, as it's written, as it's told to me, it is fact and standard, and everybody should adhere to it regardless of their beliefs. which tends to describe most Southern Baptists. I'm sure other affiliations as well, but like those are the ones that I know directly, so I'll pick on them more. But then the other camp are those who recognize that there's a certain amount of needing to understand the time and place and how a lot of things were conveyed to understand the meaning. The same way we interpret literature or any other writings that attempt to teach something that is not purely scientific or math. You know, there are certain subjects that are fairly difficult to think of as being interpretive subjects. And the latter group over time has come to recognize that interpretation is maybe not the best way to frame the conversation, and instead focus more on what is the consistent theme or message in all of the different stories that were told as teaching mechanisms, or we'll use Christianity since it's the one I'm most familiar with directly. But what message was Jesus conveying in his teachings, for example? And in all of them, it was empathy and compassion and service to others. Those are the unifying themes. And when you recognize that it's those behaviors that are the kind of guiding philosophy and vision for what it means to be Christian, then you recognize that a lot of these other people just have it plain wrong. And that's where we tend to draw the line, is we don't turn around and tell somebody, you don't know what you're talking about, because of years and years and years of traditional teaching on the subject. And in response to your IM, as I was chatting, yes, I did grow up in a Southern Baptist environment.
I see. I didn't know if you wanted to share that here, but
yeah, I don't mind.
Yeah, obviously. I wanted you to control that information. So, yeah, it's.
And so I know it's a lot to take in, but let's take it a step further. There's aside from those groups, you can have so many different variants in belief structures and everything else. In one area, it's kind of fascinating to see overlap between very scientific minds and a choice to hold a religious affiliation as well. That's a much smaller group than most others, for fairly apparent reasons, but for those who maybe don't think that way, scientific people tend to require observable data or something that can be measured or quantified to support their theories, at least in some fashion. And so a very strict mindset around what can be measured and observed and quantified and explained is often viewed as at odds with the ability to put faith into a topic or idea or subject or thought. It does exist. It actually exists more commonly than most people believe. Mm-hmm. But here's the rub. I have not met anybody with that dichotomy of views that isn't willing to say, this is what I believe, this is what I can prove or not prove. I would be stupid if I thought that I had the answers perfectly and there was no other answer possible. That last piece is the kicker.
It really is. It changes everything. It's a wonderfully honest and vulnerable position to have. I grew up with here's the Bible. Everything in it's true because the Bible says it's true. So it's true. And anything that is in conflict with the Bible is either misunderstood or wrong, or both. And that's a really narrow way of thinking.
Yeah, I had a similar version of the messaging conveyed as well. I often go back and think about how I'll say pastors. There's technically reasons why you maybe would use other terms in various places, but people who head churches and preach.
Pastors, preachers.
Yeah. I think about the transition from the fire and brimstone style of teaching to the more, I'm not going to say forgiving style, but less antagonistic style of what you would think of as current devout evangelicals and Southern Baptists in general as a whole. There has been a mellowing and an understanding of some variation, but they're variation on the same themes. All it is really a slightly different way of presenting information. And it still misses the mark completely because it's all talking about how you have to repent and you have to be good and do everything right or you're not getting anywhere.
There's something inherently wrong about the nature of who you are.
Yes. And if you take a step back and really think about what it means if you were to choose Christianity as your belief structure, it's that God had a son that he sent into the world that became the sacrifice to pay for everyone's sins because no one was perfect and would ever measure up to that standard, right? I mean, in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Everybody is flawed. That's the universal message. No one's perfect. No one's got it right. No one ever will. No one can. Unequivocally, hard stop. That's not the messaging that you find in a lot of these institutions because it doesn't make sense for how they want to portray the information and how they want the people within their institution to reflect that institution. They want to be seen as a pillar of righteousness and a higher ethical and moral standing, and all it does is breed contempt and corruption.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting about that is the folks that you're talking about, they also want to weave in a certain kind of humility. It's like, I'm worthless, but it's my God that gives me value, and he's everything. And it's this sort of fake humility. I guess that's related to the word pious.
Yeah, I would think so.
Anyway, for me, this was a nice sort of mental adjustment in my head. This is a mental adjustment. This was an internal change where it's like, I am viewing these people differently. Because I can remember not too long ago, my girlfriend was saying to me, it's like, some people who have religion, it's good for them. Like, there's value in that. It changes their life and maybe they're being a better person. And when I heard that, I thought of all the bad things. I was like, I think one of the examples that she used was like, what if religion is keeping this alcoholic from drinking? I was like, you should probably go to a therapist and that would be better. But then I thought, that's really cold and doesn't take into account certain things where it's like, I'm thinking of like, the deadbeat dad alcoholic that beats his children. And that's not necessarily who she was talking about. And it's because I thought about like all the negative things that go along with that religion and wasn't giving myself or seeing or allowing for the fact that there are people that aren't biblical literalists and they don't believe just because the Bible says so that it is so. And I feel Like, I've opened myself up to be a more empathetic and compassionate person for people who have a religious belief that I can't understand.
I think what's interesting here is as you're describing that a number of different things could take the place of religious belief.
Sure. And you know,
well, I was just thinking none more prescient than the current political climate with Republican and Democrat, like we've talked about.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that almost evokes a visceral emotional response in some people. And you get that same type of emotional, raw response from some people with regard to so much as mentioning their religious beliefs, much less anything about them.
Right.
And part of why this is also forefront of my head, I'll include a link, maybe. One of the things that I've been thinking about along the same vein about being a better person is just how absolutely horrific a person the current owner of Twitter seems to be.
What a dick.
And yeah, I know. I've had a lot of thoughts around what it means for being better, both on the scale of an individual and on the scale of someone like Musk, who has a certain amount of power and influence and money and everything else that goes with that, and where those differ, where they maybe don't differ as much as people think, etc. Like, just a lot of background noise. But where I was going with it is it's still the same argument. It's just choose a different thing to be the label, where instead of Christian or Republican or Democrat or Muslim, you could say billionaire or welfare, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like every extreme creates a environment that is easy to lose sight of what that is, because you're not familiar enough with the product of that extreme. Or maybe that's not a good way to put it. You're not familiar enough or understand enough about the mindset of that extreme. And extreme is not necessarily where you want to be either, right?
Right.
I'm not advocating that you want to understand the extremist view to understand other things. It's more the further you get from your views, as you reach that extreme, it's tougher and tougher to come up with a logical way of how that view could serve anything. That's more, I think, what I was driving at with that analogy.
Yeah. No, I really like that. Because for other things, like other labels, like where, just like what you were saying, you're like, here, this Christian here is analogous to billionaire there. It's like understanding that makes it so much easier to be more accepting of people who have religious beliefs that I don't understand.
So not to pivot the conversation necessarily, but just kind of an anecdotal thing that might be of interest to someone. The way you think about the opposing view, like maybe not even phrasing it that way. When you get to a point where you can look at a viewpoint or have a certain perception, be willing to say it's not necessarily perfect, but I haven't found anything better, and not having to change it based on what someone else thinks, but being able to allow that person to continue to think what they think, to have a different viewpoint that also is not perfect, but for your interpretation or perception doesn't match up any better than your own, and same thing for them. That's great, as long as the two people or more people involved can appreciate there's a shared understanding of a problem and a shared recognition of, well, neither one of us has the perfect answer, but our answers can coexist at this point until there is a better answer. That's really the ideal scenario that we should ascribe to. And what it requires from an individual perspective is the ability to say, I have this view. This is how well it adds up for me. This person has this view. This is how well it adds up for them. They don't need me to poke holes in it because I also don't have a perfect view, and vice versa. Like there's a certain level of being willing to not have people view things the same way as you do that we've lost, I think, over time. But I'm not so sure we ever had it either. And so one of the things that I've continually thought about is how do you cultivate a willingness to coexist with other views, because we're not really wired that way. I don't know that I have an answer for it, but one of the things that seems most applicable is reaching that point where you can objectively look at another view and say, that doesn't make sense for me, and not respond.
Yeah.
Or not respond isn't quite the right thing, but not, you don't have to engage on a discussion of that view. You can move to the next topic or next thing that serves a purpose for forging ahead with a better relationship with that person.
Yeah, it's, I mean, that's kind of the heart of what I was getting at. It's like, yeah, this view you have about, this a belief in a deity, that's actually not that important for living our lives. What is important are these other views on how do you treat women, how do you treat children, how do you treat gay people, how do you treat trans people. Those are way more important than you believe in a God and I do not.
It's funny, that's pretty much how you opened the show.
Yeah.
Talk about talking in circles. I think...
Well, let me... I was about to say a thing that might derail your whole thought, so let me let you share your thought.
So what I keep coming back to in my head is that there's still this way of describing it that just doesn't quite click in a way for most people, and I'm searching for that, even though I don't know that that's like on me to find, right? Like, I think that's why I make a joke about talking in circles, but that's part of this process, is trying to figure out a way to convey something in a way that makes more sense to more people. Because obviously we've spent enough time over just the past couple of years, much less anything longer, seeing how overall we're just not moving in a direction where people are actively trying to do better. And so how can I somehow or another come up with phrasing that helps change the narrative enough to illuminate that and move the needle, so to speak?
Yeah, I think that's also at the heart of what I was getting at. And it's like, I can't change what you believe and you can't change what I believe. And we could talk hours and hours. I've already talked hours and hours and hours about this, and the needle hasn't moved. And maybe, this needle, it's really an unimportant needle to move. What isn't, again, these other social issues, these other being a decent person issues are far more important and may have far more luck trying to move those needles. Because at the end of the day, if people are being called out for being indecent, I think that makes a lot, that you can have a more a person can have a more introspective moment for something where you can actually be called out for your lack of decency, rather than, I don't like what you believe, I think you're stupid for what you believe. Like, that just, usually makes people put walls up.
I would say it always makes people put walls up, but I'm sure there's a fringe case where somebody doesn't.
Yeah, I try not to speak in absolutes.
Yeah, I know. I think the thing that just comes to mind. The biggest part of it is even in those cases where there's a seemingly logical reason to discuss why beliefs are had, the bigger problem is that we're not even getting to those discussions. What we have at the moment is, this is how I say it should be, and I don't need to listen to anybody else. Or you can say whatever you want, this is how it needs to be. There's an initial stonewalling instead of, here's a problem, and here's how I think we address the problem. And I miss that. I mean, it's not, maybe we didn't have those conversations technically that way, but it felt like we were at least having those conversations at some point in the past. That's, not so distant past.
Right.
But not so recent past either. And
that's where...
Go ahead.
I was going to say, that's where we need to move the conversations to. That's the whole premise here, is that I want to move my conversations to that place. Like, these conversations that actually matter more. I was ready to derail the whole thing and talk about how, since it's this is going to be the episode that releases before Christmas, I wanted to talk about how Santa Claus is a deity. So, foreshadowing the show, this is the show that's going to release before Christmas, and I just wanted to have a little something about the reason for the season. And I love this thing where the reason for the season is axial tilt. The other thing I wanted to talk about was, like, there's a thing I saw where somebody was talking about how Santa Claus is a deity. He's okay, let's see, what's all-knowing, omniscient. I kept wanting to say it. For some reason, omniscient wasn't correct in my head, but yeah, he's omniscient because he knows when you're being good and bad, and he knows when you are sleeping. So he's omniscient. He's omnipresent because he can be at every single house in one night. And I'm not entirely sure if he's omnipotent, but I feel like if you're omniscient and omnipresent, you're more than likely going to be omnipotent as well. So I thought that was really interesting that Santa Claus is a deity. He also has a nemesis, much like many other religions. There's a devil of some sort. He's got Krampus. Like all deities, we, grab and borrow from all sorts of cultures. I mean, even Santa Claus himself. I believe Odin in Norse mythology had a sleigh that was pulled by reindeer. I'm not sure if it was a flying sleigh, but I do know that he had a sleigh pulled by reindeer. Yeah, there's a lot of tie-ins with Odin and Santa Claus. Anyway, I thought it was kind of fun to say Santa Claus is a deity. That was kind of all I had. I don't know how much more exploring I could do. We have a number of different ways set up for you to get in touch with us to provide feedback, ask questions, or just comment in about something we've discussed.
You can hit us up on Twitter or Instagram at untitled_hosts, or shoot an email over to untitled.hosts@gmail.com.
Or get in touch directly with Jesse at jthart.com, or get in touch with me, John, via telepathy.
If you would like to support our work or are interested in listening to our new after-show feed, head over to patreon.com/theUntitledPodcast and take a look at the options we have set up.
Thank you for listening.
We hope you've enjoyed the show.
And we hope to connect with more of you as we continue this journey.
That's a wrap.